more clearly in the graduate application process is extremely important because when you submit an application to graduate school, it's not necessarily about your experiences, but how you express those experiences to the admissions committees who are going to be deciding on which students to admit. So we'd be glad to take any questions. We might not answer them, but we'll at least respond to them. You have to realize that it is both qualitative and quantitative. And there is actually, I think, a slight element of luck. But here, remember, how does that phrase go? Luck favors the prepared mind. So we're going to try to give you some preparation such that you're more likely to get opportunities. But I know there are at least a few questions online. Be glad to take some, otherwise I'll start asking some of my own questions if you can. But any burning questions about the admissions process, be brave.
Or anything, it doesn't have to be.
Oh yeah, it doesn't have to be admissions. It could be anything, research. And your name, please?
Oh, I'm Marie.
Hi, Marie.
Could you talk about the difference between strong and weak statement of purposes and suggestions in general, what to avoid, what to make sure to emphasize? Okay, so the question is how to distinguish between sort of strong and weak statements of purpose. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Jenna.
Research is very collaborative.
Yes, we are collaborating at this very moment. So my take on statements of purpose is, so I went back and looked at my statement of purpose, and I turned red. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this. Now I know why I didn't get into every school. The trick of, I think, the stronger research statement is one that's actually about research, as opposed to everything you had for lunch and dinner since you were in kindergarten having to do with programming. There are a lot of research statements that go on and on and on about the candidate. There's an element of that, but I think at the end of the day, most admissions committees are going to want to know, okay, where do you get your passion for this particular research topic? I don't want to know if you like everything in computation. I want to know what in computation interests you. Could be one or two things. It could be a few different topics, but basically going in depth on that rather than saying, I've been programming since kindergarten, because it's really immaterial.
Yeah, I think formulating the problem, so finding a problem that you're interested in, formulating it, talking about what makes that problem challenging, how you might solve that, so you don't have to have all of the answers, and then why do you want to solve it? So what impact do you hope to have? And being able to write that very clearly in a statement can speak volumes, even if that's not what you end up working on. So in fact, I think in my statement, I also went back and looked at it, and it was also very cringeworthy. But I focused on hardware, and I really wanted to work on medical devices, and that's not at all what I ended up doing, but that was okay.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple things to say about that. So the first thing you want to do, and this is generally true in life, but the first thing you want to do is just not be marked as a bozo in your application. There's some very sort of like nuts and bolts things you can do that actually will assure that you at least get past the first stage.
Let me say, James does not speak for us. But
yeah. I totally speak for them. But, I mean, in the sense that, a lot of the statements that you'll look at, for example, there are things like, typos or just, there's not a very clean narrative flow, ignoring the fact that, maybe the research vision is good or bad. But, proofread your stuff. I mean, this sounds super obvious, but apparently it is not super obvious to vast swaths of the population. And so you just want to make sure that you don't get your application rejected just by virtue of the fact that, it's sort of not professionally done, right? And then the next thing I think that you want to do, and this holds for anything you write, anything you say, you have to be able to say specifically what is the narrative, okay? Like that, it actually has to be there. You have to think about it as a first order principle, right? So people always give this notion of the elevator pitch, right? So if you're stuck in an elevator with someone that, you want to convince, you're a smart person, what's the 30-second version of what you're going to say, right? And that should actually, I think, pop in your research statement, right? So kind of like Kevin was saying, you don't just want to go out there and say, listen, I'm an enthusiast about computers, I turn knobs on all the time, I power things in, because we all do, right? What you want to be able to say, I think, is something like, I'm interested in a particular topic X, Y, and Z. It's a problem because, A, B, and C. the way that I think you should solve this is so on and so forth, and this is why that'll be important, right? If you can at least get a solid paragraph like that in your statement, then I think that'll help you sort of structure the entire rest of it, right? But so many times I see people describe their research projects or what they're doing, and they're clearly enthusiastic about it, but they can't crisply say exactly what it is that they're trying to do.
Or why they're doing it.
Yeah. Actually, one of my students, I still recall one of his applications. He had not done any undergraduate research whatsoever. He went on to get an NSF Fellowship Award, which I encourage you all to look into. But in his application, he basically went through a number of research conferences that personally interested him, and he talked about the particular research papers published in the last couple of years. And he said, you know, I read this paper, I didn't understand this part because I thought they could have done it this other way. And, you know, I would be interested in exploring these alternative design strategies and measuring the performance and comparing the security properties. So it's not necessary that you have to have some magic solution. In fact, I think very few people have magic solutions to problems. If you've already solved it, you probably don't need to go to graduate school. Yeah. And one other sort of comical note, a colleague, one of our peers was going through admissions folders, and a tragic mistake some student makes every year is a regular expression search and replace for school names. And let's just say there was one student one year who did a regex replace MIT to CMU and didn't think that there would be other words with MIT in it. And so admitsid became admitCMUid. We noticed that, okay? So we know everybody's applying to many schools, but you know, be classy.
And research the faculty at the schools that you're applying to, especially if there's a certain area that you're interested in working in, and you can put those in your application.
Is that another question?
Come on, more questions.
Two, and then over there. Yes, your name, please.
Margaret Stroud.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi. So I don't know a lot about computer science graduate school because I've heard more about graduate school in other fields. But so I know in some fields you apply directly to work with one specific professor, and some it's more of a rotational base. Is computer science grad school like more one or the other, or is there some of both?
That's a pretty good question. You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's an element of both. So when you apply to a department, generally you're applying to the department, not a single individual. But that said, there are advantages and disadvantages to calling out particular faculty. I know that there are certain faculty that basically search for their name in the applications to figure out the students that would most likely match their interest. It is a bit of a matching game. So it can be helpful. Now, if you list only one name, or if you list all 50 names, you know, that's probably not going to be a very good strategy, but probably something in between is going to work well for most departments.
Yeah, and you get a chance to, it's different at different schools and different departments, but during your first year, you'll often get more exposed to the type of research projects that different groups are doing, and you'll get to talk to students that are working with different advisors. So it's not always set in stone straight from the start. So there are chances to move around, say after a master's thesis, but it depends sort of on the department.
Yeah, and actually, this, so of course you have to get admitted first, but once you get admitted, most schools have visitation days. And then you can go and you can see the sort of social dynamics of the different groups to figure out if it matches the way you hope to, you know, live your research.
And one thing I would advise too is that if you go on those visit days, so talk to professors, but then talk to their grad students, right? Because students, there's sort of like a sense of solidarity. So, you know, it's very easy for professors to say, oh, totes, I mean, you know, you work whenever you want, you know, I'm really like that. But then when you talk to the grad students, they're like, I haven't eaten in 3 days. It's dark in here all the time. Trust me, like, they will tell you that, right? And on the other side, you know, if they like the professor, they'll say, yeah, it's great. When I came here, I didn't quite know how to do research. This person's really helped to, you know, shape my career, so on and so forth. But really, I highly recommend talking to the grad students.
At least one more follow-up. I do think it is really important to identify the existence of potential advisors, because if you apply to a school and you're like, I really don't want to work with these people, then it's probably not going to be a very pleasant experience. And not every school is going to have all the disciplines covered. So, you probably want to pick your schools based upon the set of topics you're interested in, but always keeping in mind you might change your topic. So, I think we had a question over here, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, I'm Canaria. How are you?
Hi, Canaria.
My question is, if you haven't done any undergraduate research, and it's like sort of like a game, what else could you do?
All right, from the giggle, I think there are probably other people with the same question. So, if you don't yet have undergraduate research experience, what can you do to improve your the effectiveness of your grad school application? Is basically the question. I'll just go back to my student for a moment. So, my student, one of my students had no undergraduate research whatsoever, but he wrote a very effective essay. It was very convincing. He had actually been out of school for 5 or 10 years, I think, working in industry, but he kept the passion going where he would actually read research papers, the peer-reviewed research. We're not talking magazine articles and Slashdot, but we're talking peer-reviewed academic venues. And he was able to talk intelligently about it and form his own opinions. So I think that's one way to do it. There are probably many other ways.
Yeah, so you might be surprised. You might have actually done more research than you did during your undergrad. So if you think back to course projects where you worked independently on a research project, and you can talk about that in your statement. It's never too late for research too. You can always do research in the summer, but in terms of making your application strong, you've probably done more research than you.
I mean, even if you, let's say maybe you develop apps on the side or something like that, I mean, there might be some element in what you did that was novel or that led you to some insight about some aspect of computers that's broken. I mean, I think that a lot of undergraduate, for me, for example, I did a little bit of undergraduate research, but not a lot. And, oftentimes undergraduate research is actually sort of code work if you did programming, sort of in service of like some other professor's sort of larger project. And I think that, even in that case, if you learn something, right, about sort of the way that the current world is broken. I mean, that's a lot of what research is. A way that the world can be improved through computers. And so, even for like internship applications that I see over at Microsoft, sometimes you'll see people who don't have they don't have a lot of publications or they don't necessarily have like quote unquote formal training. But if they write their statement in a way that indicates that they're curious, they've thought deeply about some particular aspect of computer science, I think that can also work.
Okay, I think the next question is here. Your name, please?
Alex.
Hi, Alex.
This might be a little big, but so I noticed a lot of the research fields that you guys are in, that you were presenting, were working on kind of fixing existing but kind of flawed aspects of computer science, so like security problems, like managing data that already exists. And I was curious, just like from your experience, how much of research is completely new, innovative, like searching for new, innovative discoveries that are completely unsearched territory, and how much of it is trying to repair the old?
Okay.
And it's a vague question, but like.
So I'm tenured, so I can say anything, right? Personally, I think there's nothing completely new in the world, and I often tell my students, don't use that word new in your paper, because maybe it's novel, but new, come on. It might be used in a novel way.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value to assembling things that are well known, but in a way that was not anticipated. So I'm not too concerned about being completely new. Of course, you don't want to be reinventing the wheel completely,
Exactly.
Which happens actually more often than you might think.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I think that it depends on what you mean when you say new and uncharted. Because I do think that unless you're going into a completely from first class, totally new sort of like hardware paradigm or something like that.
I'm thinking something like quantum processors, AI systems, which we really haven't developed a good functioning system for like these things.
Sure, but like even if you look at things like let's say AI, so like AI currently happens to be sort of a hot field, but it's not like AI just started.
Yeah.
I mean, AI's been around for decades, and cloud computing has changed some aspects of that. There's been some new math that's come along. But AI isn't new in sort of I guess a strong sense. So I guess the way that, at least I look at the research is, kind of like Kevin was saying, there's things that are novel that maybe solve an interesting problem or sort of take something, there's a new scenario that arises. And I guess just sitting around and thinking, is this going to be totally different? Has no one else done this before? Yeah. I think that's less useful as a research driver than who could this help, what problem does this fix? Yeah. So on and so forth.
Can I just add one thing? So for example, as researchers, usually we try to position our problems as, our research as, oh, there's this problem and we solve it. This is how research works. Kevin could have come in and he could have asked you, can you hack a pacemaker? Rather than saying, oh, do pacemakers have a security problem? And if you had posed the question in that sense, you would have thought, oh, I have absolutely no idea. Why would you be even able to deliver an electric talk to a person? Yeah. So it's really about how you present it. From a research perspective, it's important. The most important research is the one that solves a real problem that exists today, right? Yeah. Because otherwise, it's
and you can use innovation to solve that topic.
Probably.
Right, and sometimes the novelty comes from how you think about that problem.
Yeah.
I see a question in the back.
Do you recommend?
Oh, I'm sorry, your name.
Amy. Do you recommend reaching out to potential advisors before the admissions process? And if so, how to reach out to them in a way that doesn't spam a bunch of people's emails?
So the question is, do you recommend reaching out to potential advisors, faculty at the universities where you're applying? Yes and no. So people have different opinions. You do need to realize that the faculty tend to receive dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of emails. So it's very difficult for them to respond personally to each and every one. So if you do choose to reach out, I would say pick the advisors where you feel like you're not writing a form letter. The most effective ones are where you've actually, by accident, come across one of their research papers and sort of, just out of pure interest in the research, like, who do I contact to learn about this? Oh, this person. But if you come at it as, I want to go to University X, I'm going to go look for everyone who starts with a B. That's, probably not the best approach. But
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, you basically want to avoid writing emails that sound like the canonical Dear Sir or Madam emails, and those come up a lot. So in other words, people who are very earnest, they basically spam people and say, Dear, so-and-so, I am interested in computers. I would like to come to such and such institution. And we do get a lot of those things, and those get rejected. I mean, those get deleted almost immediately, right? So I think the important thing is that if you're going to talk to someone directly, once again, have that narrative. Don't write like an essay. Say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I came across your paper on whatever, I thought it was interesting. Maybe you have one or two sentences of insight, right? Like, here's a new direction you could go to, or I was a little bit confused about this, and then sort of land the plane. And I think that, if the professor is then interested in sort of continuing, then they'll respond. And if not, then you've done no harm, right? Because you just wrote a short email, it was nice, but they were busy.
And I think you can certainly, so after you've applied, after you find out, you get admitted, then you can certainly send emails too and say, hey, I've been admitted to your school, I'm interested in working with you, and there you're more likely to get a response.
Oh, Mickens.
So one thing you also might be able to do is if you are working with faculty at your school in that area, you can actually ask them for a list of people to contact, and maybe also ask them if they would be willing to contact those professors for you, because they often know them personally.
Yeah, actually, I'll just second that. If I were to get a note from someone I've worked with in the past saying you really should, watch for this application coming in from student X, that means a lot more than someone I've never met before. So it can be helpful. But the more, if you do write an email, the more that it can be onto the research rather than, hello, my name is X and my GPA is Y. Nobody cares about your GPA, I'm sorry, or your GRE scores. They just want to know about your research passion. I'd recommend keeping it short to the research side. I think I saw another,
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
So what if...
Would you like to go to graduate school? But that will be on our next panel.
What if I'm interested in going to the best grad school that I can get into, but I really don't care so much about what is the research that I'm doing?
Stop asking hypothetical questions.
I think many students they're like, oh, okay, I want to go to the best grad school I can get into, but they don't care. I mean, they are very flexible in terms of research, and I think even coming into grad school, I was quite flexible in what I was willing to work on, but that was not something that I could write in my grad school application.
Yeah, does Dina know this? I don't know. There are definitely a few students I've worked with where I just kind of step out of the way and I sort of say, here's some resources, go do magic. But most of the students I work with are interested in a particular topic. I don't have a particular strategy I could recommend there. An anti-strategy would be, I would strongly recommend against, the reason, if you were to write in your essay, the reason I'm applying to this school is my parents told me so. Or, my parents said I should get a PhD, that's probably not a good reason. But I think at the top schools, you're more likely to find serendipitous sort of set covers of all the research topics, at least many of them. So you'll probably have many opportunities if you go to any of the top schools. Some of the smaller schools, you might actually find, if you're the opposite of this question, and you have a very particular topic in mind, you might find yourself applying to some smaller schools that just have heavy emphasis on a particular topic. So it really depends.
Yeah, I think a lot of students don't necessarily, particularly if they haven't done research before, they're not necessarily going to be able to say, for sure, like my dissertation will be this, and I want to go to school, and they definitely will have support for this. So I actually think that's okay. Like, that shouldn't scare you off from applying to grad school. I do think that, for example, everyone should probably have a notion of these are the classes I enjoyed the most, for example, or like these are the types of computer science things I seem to happen to enjoy more. You can always switch, but you should definitely, when you're applying to a department, let's say, like for me personally, I knew that I might want to do like system stuff. I might also be interested in security stuff. Like I knew that I didn't want to do theory, and I knew that I didn't want to do HCI. So for me personally, I sort of looked for schools that were roughly
all great topics.
Oh yeah, no, listen, my dad's a theoretician, or he could be to make the story better. I just thought that me personally, everyone has to choose their own path, right? But just for me, like when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to apply, there were some schools, for example, that were highly ranked, like according to U.S. News and World Report, that didn't have like strengths where I thought I might want to go, and so I decided not to apply to those schools. And so I think there is at least a sort of a loose filter that you can apply on the place that you want to go to, even if you don't know specifically what it is you want to research.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my pieces of advice, is to be flexible. So I think that, but it's still important that in your research statement, you show that you're capable of thinking more deeply about a problem. So you should be all over the place. But when students come in and they have sort of their mind set on working on one particular problem with one particular professor, and that professor doesn't happen to have funding that year, then what? Or research can change, it can evolve. So even if your heart is set on working on one particular thing, that might change over time. So just keep that in mind.
One thing that I've actually seen is a lot of the people in my group here at MIT, they did not apply saying that they want to work on wireless networks or they want to work on networks. People apply saying they want to work on crypto, or they want to work on machine learning, or they want to work in theory, or they want to be in EE. But what really mattered is what their application was, rather than what is the very specific area that they talked about. They highlighted what their strengths were. They highlighted that they are able to think at it deeply, like they said. And so that is what got them admitted. And then different professors said, "Oh, okay, we want to work with him or her or someone."
Right, and in that vein, the letters of recommendation have a huge bearing because typically those letters will reflect on how you respond to challenge. So everything in graduate research is about charting unknown territory or unfamiliar territory. So if you've had an experience where you've basically been, thrown into a pool and told learn to swim, and we want to see how you react. I don't mean that literally, but basically how you respond to open problems. So one of the challenges of adjusting from undergraduate studies to graduate studies is that it's a lot harder to put quantitative marks to graduate studies. So in undergrad, you have a GPA. You kind of can chart where you are, but in graduate school, it's actually a little bit more like English. It's more qualitative. It's more prose, believe it or not. It's squishy. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Hi, my name's Lynn.
On the recommendations thing, what would you recommend for, like, obviously a research, I'm not sure if we get for that, but like, should it be like a wide variety? Should it be like a lot of research people?
So the question is how do you pick your letter writers? I think you got to start with the people who know you, and obviously, and ideally, I think faculty, but they could also be supervisors from a job. Probably the best candidates are faculty who have written graduate school letters in the past, so that they know how to do that. If you have had research experience, that does give you a slight upper hand because they can actually talk about something specific in their letters. I know when I applied, I think I had one person write a letter who just knew me from a course, from just doing well in a course, although I think letters written by someone where you've done research will carry more weight than one where you just did well in a course, but it doesn't hurt.
I'd say when asking your letter writers for a reference, it's also important not only to ask, can you write me a reference letter, but can you write me a good reference letter?
Yeah, another thing I would add too, and this is just my own personal opinion about this, I get militant about recommendation letters because I've read a lot of the research into what makes a good letter and what makes a bad letter. So I think it's particularly important for female students and members of ethnic minorities, but it's important for everyone. And getting back to the point about can you write me a good letter, there's certain things that a letter should say to make it pop, right? All the research shows that you want a letter to show that you have shown initiative, that you have led something or demonstrate a sort of intellectual heft, for lack of a better term. And I can send some of you guys or post maybe on Piazza some of these links to these studies. And so it's very important that your letter writer can speak to some of these things directly. Right? And so like what I will do sometimes is that like maybe I want to ask someone for a recommendation and I know that they want to write a very good letter, but maybe they sort of don't quite know the nuts and bolts of how to do it. So I'll say, oh hey, by the way, I've been reading these articles on how to write a good letter, could you please emphasize? And then I'll say, the fact that I did X, Y, and Z and had results A, B, and C. Right? And you can be very friendly about it. But I think sometimes it can be useful to sort of put people into a channel and they can let their water flow that way. Because a lot of times you'll see people who write letters for you, who intend to write you a very good letter, but they end up focusing on things that other letter readers will not see as differentiating. There's a lot of research on this that shows that if you tend to describe people in social terms, like, oh, Todd is friendly, or Steve is a great coworker to have. Right? That's nice. People want to know that you're not a murderer, right? But when it comes to actually differentiating you in terms of can you do research, people want to hear statements like, oh, Sally led this project. Todd contributed this specific intellectual, component, so on and so forth. So it's just useful, I think, for all the students to read that literature, and then maybe, like I said, sometimes you can hint that to your letter writers to make sure they put you in a good place.
Unrelated to hints.
No.
Related to hints, I remember when I was looking for letter writers, not everyone agreed to write a letter. So you do need to sort of read the body language of when you go to, so don't be afraid of asking faculty for letters, but just be prepared that it might not be because of you. It could be maybe they're committed to writing 10 and they sort of hit what their capacity. Give them an out, a slight out, but at least that's what I usually do. But you've got to strike the right tone between sort of being firm and saying, I would like a letter, but not coming off as, how dare you not write me a letter. So somehow you got to strike the right balance, and I don't have a good answer on how to do that, but try.
Yes. Yeah. So.
Oh, your name, please?
Oh, I'm David.
Hi, David.
So all of you it might have been a while, but have gone through, all of graduate school, and if you think about the experience, I'm sure there were some ups and downs. I'm sure the generals were probably not your favorite part of grad school. Do you feel like as you stayed in grad school that you enjoyed it more, or is it something that sort of evolved as you were in school? Were there hurdles that you had to get through, like getting past general exams, meeting course requirements, getting thesis proposals accepted that maybe were really stressful, but then there were other parts when you were really into the research that you got to enjoy more? Can you talk a little bit about the balance between those?
Do you want to repeat that very long question?
So the summary of the question is talk about some of the ups and downs of sort of graduate school life, it sounds like. And I was in graduate school before Facebook existed, so everything was, shiny.
Well, I graduated most recently. I get big. So I can talk a little bit about that. So there are definitely ups and downs, and that's just the nature of research. Some days everything is working, and some days nothing works. But I think it's not so much that I started to enjoy myself more in grad school, but I certainly became more confident in grad school the longer I spent here. In your first year, everything is new. And if you don't have a lot of experience having done research, working in open problems, you're wondering where your grade is, where's the A. But that's not how grad school works. So, but it's a little bit scary in the beginning, but then you gain this confidence as you spend more time in it, and I guess it becomes more enjoyable in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I mean, really, grad school is like the Matrix. It's very difficult to describe what the Matrix is before you're there. I can tell you my own personal experience, and I think, like, you know, perhaps many people in this room, you know, I came out of high school, had like an 8.0 GPA at 4. I went to Georgia Tech. I'm like, yeah, the hits keep on coming, man. It was great. You know, things are very focused on grades. It's very much focused on you're given these problems, which may be hard, but which are knowably solvable. Right? It's like, in other words, they give you a term paper to write or some program to write, and like it may take a lot of time, but for sure it can be done. So then I got into PhD school, right? And I'm like, man, I've been on a roll, it's gonna be fantastic. And so one of the first things I did as a PhD student, I was like, I want to continue to have like my sterling 18.0 GPA. And let me tell you right now, right? Once I got out of undergrad school, I have literally never been asked my GPA again. Ever. And I mean that like a universal law, but that has never ever happened, right?
What's your GPA?
I'm off the panel next year! Right? It was 3.97, son, though. I had it ready just for this moment. So yeah, and so for me, when I first started grad school, I was super concerned about, like, you know, focusing on the classes. You know, typically you have that class component that's a prerequisite before you become like a PhD candidate. And my advisor would say, really focus on the research, learn how to do research. I'm like, no, my GPA is so important to me. And I can just tell you straight up right now, focusing too much on classes cost me a year in terms of like graduation time. And I'm not saying you should fail your classes, but I'm saying that you need to look at them in a different way. Right? So typically, you know, your department will have certain requirements, or like you have to get a certain grade or whatever. So get that grade. You know, try to do well in your classes. But like what I learned my second year is that my classes are actually designed to teach me breadth about my field, right? And that I will then take certain techniques from, let's say, my database class, even though I'm not a database person, from my AA class, even though I'm not an AI person. And that was actually super useful. And I think once you sort of learn the rules that change for the game, then graduate school becomes much more fun. But, you know, at first you're used to doing term papers or term assignments, and you're like, there's just an answer, this is a set play. You know, work on this for a week, then it'll be done. And like one thing I tell my parents and my grandparents, like they always encourage me to get an education. And then, you know, about 3 years in, they're like, what's taking so long with that PhD? And I was like, you told me better. And so what I would tell them, though, I would say, you know, there's actually no Wikipedia article that I could actually look up and then find the answer. Like, I'm generating the knowledge for that article, and that takes time. And once that actually sunk in, like sort of the ups and downs of grad school became much more powerful.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question before we swap to the student panel. So we can pick up with student-oriented questions. But yes, Jenny.
My name is Violeta. I have like a lot of questions, but what is the process for an international student? But I also have another question that it's like, how do you control all this person who reads all the papers? Because I know that there's some universities that have like hundreds of applications. So I would like to know if there's one people who read 50 or one, all the people read 500? Or how is this process?
So the two questions I'm hearing then are, what are international issues, and one, who reads your application? And it's going to vary by school. So I'll quickly say a couple words. We carefully brought along an international Canadian. International students, so actually I'm probably not the best answer since I didn't go through the process myself, but some of the things that come to mind that are different would be the TOEFL for English and actually the GREs. but that's more quantitative.
Once you're admitted, there will be a visa process. So you'll go through the F1 to get a student visa. But in terms of the application itself, I guess it's different for different countries too. So Canadian doesn't actually work with people.
Oh, that's right. So I believe most schools, it depends if English is your native language, whether you would take the TOEFL. Make sure to take the GREs this fall, for instance. Actually, that goes for everybody. Not every school requires the GRE, but many do, and so that'll open more doors if you take the GRE and do well. On the topic of who reads the application, it varies greatly by school. I know some departments where it's just one person. I know others with a committee. But you do need to realize that from the top 10 to the top 20, top 30, those schools might be seeing 1,000 applications for maybe 40 potential recruits the next year. But I actually think that's the wrong metric to think about as an applicant, because there's a vast number of applications where they're kind of making the mistakes where we're telling you to avoid. That they weren't able to express their research passion, so it was difficult for them to advance to the more serious review. But in some schools, you'll see a committee, so various people reading the applications, voting, and rating.
Typically, faculty, professors will be reading them.
That is correct. Although some universities actually have graduate students involved with the admissions process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Kevin's right. It's difficult to sort of try to game the system from the perspective of like, I'm going to guess who's going to be reading my letter, and then somehow, put some, hidden sugar cookie in there for them to
Shout out.
That's right. I accept sugar cookie bribes. Just to be clear about that. But yeah, I think really what you have to do is just try to follow best practices, and then and then sort of put it out there in the world, and hopefully sort of you'll see some success there. Because I think that like for me, for example, like I don't know what you guys think about this, but like one mistake I made was I felt like I applied to too few schools for grad school. Because once again, I was stuck in this mindset, like back when I was getting out of high school, like, if you have a good GPA, then everybody's going to want me, right? And then to a crude approximation, that is sort of how undergrad applications often work. But at grad school, it's not just the grades, right? I mean, this research statement really makes a big difference, right? So, and because of that, there can be a little bit more randomness in the process. Right? So like I know a lot of students who are very strong as undergrads, as high school students, gotten to all these places as undergrad applicants, applied to grad school, right? Made the same mistake I made, applied to too few, and although they were very good, they didn't get as many schools as they thought that they would. So if I had graduate school just to do over again, I would apply to more places.
So I do actually have one actual piece of advice, and that is related to the statistics. I'd say it may be sad to hear this, but I think if you just have the average time spent per application, it might only be 30 to 60 seconds, right? For the first round of filtering, because think about it, 1,000 applications, there's no way you can read 30 pages and all these letters. So that research statement, that statement of purpose rather, needs to be written to be read. So if you're wandering around and you have a narrative text, when I was in kindergarten, I started programming, and then, I had this for lunch. Then you wasted your 30 seconds. So I would recommend cut right to the chase. I'm applying because I'm interested in research on these topics, although I'm open to other suggestions, blah, 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 and then explain why you're interested in those. Try to use your experiences, but it's really more about the research rather than the researcher. Make the best of your 30 seconds. So, we got one burning question?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one burning question, then we're going to swap to our students.
So I was
your name is?
Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi. So
from San Diego?
UC San Diego.
Oh, I figured. Yeah.
So do you think it would be harder to get into grad school if I were to take a few years off to work for a tech company to sort of pay off my student debts and save up for grad schools, or would it be easier to just go straight out of getting my bachelor's?
Okay. So the question is, what are the factors if I'm thinking about going off to the workforce for a few years before going to graduate school? There's no single answer to that. You did have one question about loans, and I can tell you one thing about loans is at least there are many kinds of loans from the federal government, at least, that go into grace if you're continuing as a graduate student. In fact, I'm still paying off on my student loans. I was in graduate school for 11 years, okay, and it was a lot of fun. Some definition of fun. But there are definitely students who've gone off into the workforce. I had one of my students who was working at a hedge fund company for I think 3 or 4 years. One of the challenges, however, if you go off into the workforce is when you come back, you're going to be working alongside students fresh out of undergraduate, and they're not used to that luxury living,
Yeah.
So you may be having to get used to the lifestyle again of working, perhaps not in your $200,000 job or whatever.
Yeah. I would say, would it help though if the job that I took, because there are a lot of job offers from Google, from Facebook. So would it actually help me if I were to just take 2 years off to work for one of these tech companies and then apply?
It could. I mean, I think that I've seen a lot of people who've taken some time off, gone into the tech industry, come back, and then in their applications, once again it comes to that narrative. They can say things like, "Hey, I've had industrial experience at such and such company doing cloud stuff. Some of the stuff worked out well, some of it didn't. I'm really interested in fixing this problem." Right? And I think that once again, the background, the trajectory to how you get to grad school, there's a lot of different paths that come in there. But I think a lot of what the application does for you is say, here's why my trajectory sort of makes sense to someone who wants to learn how to do research. And so I don't think that going out into industry would hurt you if you can say, here's what I learned, here's what I think the future computing should be in a specific way. So.
Yeah, Sean, did you have a follow-up?
Having been on admissions committees for quite a long while.
Sean's from Dartmouth College.
Hi.
Professor.
Having been in industry and coming back can really help you stand out among the other peer applicants. However, a lot of applications, especially when you get to 60-second read, it might be hard to see that. So if you are taking that path, really try to make it clear in your application. Oh, I've been doing this for 4 years and now I'm doing that.
Okay.
And that helps. And also the TOEFL thing, at least at Dartmouth, if you've gone to an English-speaking undergraduate institution for 4 years, usually you can say, "If I take the TOEFL," and they'll say,
Okay, well, I'm imagining there are more questions, but Piazza, you're welcome to answer, or excuse me, ask or answer questions in Piazza if you have any follow-ups. But we're going to go ahead and switch to the student panel. So ask the students to come forward, and we'll swap places. So thanks for your questions.